Wonderful. Hello, everybody. It is Wednesday, December 2nd, 2:46 p.m. I believe it is still snowing here in Toronto, Canada. I hope things are happy and safe on your side of the world. It's Q here, and for this stream, I am going to walk through this G2 components project, aka the next, hopefully the next iteration of the WordPress components slash Gutenberg UI. Let's see. Very early, more recently, Matthias, he wrote a little post here in the Gutenberg repo describing some of the issues that we've run into in the global styles design tools kind of space. And this G2 components project, or the next generation of WordPress components, the thing I've been working on for a while, it's is designed to solve some of these problems from both a design and also code perspective. It's coming from it from a very design systems kind of thinking perspective, but hopefully made accessible through how all the various parts fit together so that the folks using this library, be it third-party developers or core contributors, they are able to be successful with it because hopefully it's the components, the APIs, and all that stuff have been streamlined in a way where things are easy to use. Of course, this project, this code, the code for this UI, it's just one piece of the bigger pie. And the bigger pie is that I believe the spirit that this project embodies, in that it tries to simplify a lot of methods and ways of creating UI, but then also paying attention to and really adding rich detail to like interactions and how things look and feel, all that kind of stuff, needs to carry beyond just a code. Design needs to embody that. Product needs to embody that. A lot of different aspects need to kind of embody this so that overall the experience of WordPress and also Gutenberg can be elevated and made more consistent so that the product is just easier to use for folks. The project is easier to contribute to, both from a design and code and product perspective. So yeah, those are some of the big picture ideals that this project is trying to kind of embody and respect, I suppose. So this thing that was started maybe about 3 months ago or so. Yeah, 3 months ago. There we go. It was something that I kind of started really on my own. And it came from a place of working with Gutenberg and also the design tools area. And in general, there were many gaps that I have experienced and also observed. Prior to this, I come from a design system space, so this is not foreign to me at all. I'm very familiar with thinking about things from like a component library level, lower level systems architecture, that kind of stuff. Also for both in code and also in design. So it was quite easy for me to kind of spot the opportunities for improvement in that space for the Gutenberg project. So that's what this is. It's my personal attempt to try to solve some of those problems. And I've been working on it kind of on my personal repo for a while. And thankfully, as this started to gain traction, and this was my hope that others would be able to kind of see the value in this and feel excited about it. And hopefully this thing can be brought over into Gutenberg land. So, G2 components. I created a little landing page for this thing, just mostly kind of for fun, but also to kind of test this library a bit to see how I could build something that as well, as different compared to an application as possible. And that would be like a marketing landing page where uh, font size isn't 14 pixels or 13 pixels and things need more spacing and all that kind of stuff. So this entire page actually was built with G2. Down to the colors and the font size and all that kind of stuff. It's using all the various systems of G2 to build this stuff, and by golly, it was, as someone who's built marketing pages before, this was a dream to work with. And I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, but this was amazing to work with. And another reason why I wanted to kind of construct this thing, other than the fact that it kind of looks cool, you can interact with it and stuff, is I wanted to force myself to be able to articulate the most important parts of G2 in a way that could be summarized in a couple of sentences. Basically, what marketing sites are very good at doing. So from the very beginning, G2 was architected, or the plans of it was that it needed to be a system built from many different systems. I'm going to jump over to Photoshop now. Yay. Yeah. Have my little drawing tablet. I'm going to draw some stuff. So in the beginning, I had identified a couple of systems for G2. Hopefully you can see this. I'm going to zoom in a bit. The first one was accessibility. And this came in the form of Reukit. And Reukit is a low-level React UI toolkit with accessibility at the heart of it. It's created by Diego Haas, who's also a coworker of mine. Diego is awesome, by the way. And Reukit is also used by many, many libraries and component libraries out there, just because of how good it is. I also recognized we needed some sort of style system. And a style system goes beyond just the fact that you're using, say, Sass, or it goes beyond the fact that you're using emotion or styled components or anything like that. That's just how your styles are compiled. Part of the style system supports things like theming, has built-in kind of different modes like dark mode, light mode, high contrast mode, colorblind, which, by the way, most style systems don't have built-in support for. This was something I identified and added within G2. On top of that, there has to be some sort of structure for how and where you put styles, how things kind of compile together, and most importantly, how can people customize these styles, because these solutions, these CSS and JS solutions or Sass or whatever the case may be, when you see people talk about it on Medium or whatever blog thingy, on a WordPress blog or whatever, and they talk about kind of architecture ideas they have for, like, this is how you're supposed to handle specificity. This is how you're supposed to handle, I don't know, naming classes and so on. It's all fine and dandy when all of that is being applied to like a brand new project. That's one thing. But if your project isn't brand new, it's all fine and dandy if you're applying it to some sort of enclosed ecosystem. And Gutenberg, and especially within WordPress, it's not that. The core code has no control, essentially has no control for what styles may exist in the environment. Those styles can come from themes, they can come from plugins and so on. So therefore, the styles that render the UI, they need to work out of the box in this type of environment where styles may be hostile or may be unpredictable. So a lot of that consideration was put into the style system. And in fact, the style system is probably the most complex system within G2, and it's at the heart of this next gen UI project. So we have accessibility, we have styles, and the other one is try to write a little neater. Animation. So animation, it's different than if you were to just use like the animation property in CSS. The animation property is it's just a means to do animation. There's a lot within animation that, frankly, you need some sort of library or engine to kind of take care of for you. There is mount, unmount handling, sequencing, staggering, timeline synchronization, high performance rendering. There's a lot. And interpolation. There's a lot that goes into animation libraries. And especially if you want to mimic some of the experiences we get to enjoy every day on iOS and Android devices, where things just feel so fluid and nice. And it's very interesting that, when you jump over to the pure web version, not like the desktop app version, the web version of the application, like for example, mobile Twitter versus web Twitter, there is a very big distinct difference in terms of how the thing feels. And that's because web technology, unfortunately, can't easily accommodate these things out of the box. We need libraries, we need custom solutions to be able to do things like gestures and animation and so on. So speaking of gestures, we also need some sort of gesture system. So that can accommodate things like drag, mostly drag, but in the future perhaps swiping, pinching, all that stuff. But so far within the context of the UI framework, the UI library, we've just been using drag. So that's another one we need is this one, a context system. Context. Is something that I built previously that was very successful in terms of allowing the UI layer to integrate into an environment that is older, that has potentially hostile styles or hostile code. Sounds kind of or unknown or older kind of things that could potentially break stuff. Kind of similar to the WordPress Gutenberg environment. So the context, effectively within the context of this project, allows for the components to be able to have, in a sense, self-awareness. They know the system is aware of them. They are aware of the system, and they can be aware of where they are when they say render within another kind of component. And they can adjust their behaviors accordingly. So that's what the context system is. And another one, this one is a smaller one. State. So G2, for the purposes of performance, has a custom kind of state management system, which is based on Zustand, from the folks that have created React Spring. And the reason why it has this custom state management system versus using something like a React use states or React use reducer or one of the built-in kind of state management things from React is it's far more performant, especially at the low kind of library level. And I found that the architecture is much easier to grok when you need to do lots of complex UI things that happen really, really quickly. So, for example, the text input, you're typing something, you may click and drag, and therefore the number needs to jump. And then maybe you're holding shift and it needs to jump by 10, things like that. Having that expressed in the way that Zustand provides for us it makes it much easier to kind of work with, and also we get all the performance benefits from that. The last one, it's not necessarily a system. It's more of a collection of things. We have Utils. Utils, if you take a look at basically any project, they'll have some sort of Utils package. Utils is basically the junk drawer where all the little tiny bits go, and don't underestimate it because these little tiny bits are used everywhere here. Very similar to how many projects rely on, say, Lodash, Gutenberg included, to handle things that things that really should be part of JavaScript, but is not. Utils does basically the same thing. It does some things with math. It does some things with arrays, some things with React, some things with strings, and so on. So these are the primary pieces of the component library project. And if I were to kind of draw what depends on what in terms of like the lowest level part, utils would be like lowest level. And then the second to that would kind of be state. Utils is then used inside of context. State is used inside of context. State is also used inside of style. Utils is used inside of style. Gestures is used within animations. And then ultimately, all this stuff is then exported out. This is getting a little messy, I apologize. So for every single one of these, they're exported out, and based on these essentially 6 or 7 systems, then comes the components that are built on top of this. So if I were to jump over to this kind of flow map I have for the components project, what you're seeing right here might seem a little like nuts and kind of big. Not big, but like, oh, there's arrows all over the place. This is basically the order of things for how pieces from the components project should be integrated within Gutenberg. So to start off, we need to move the utils package. And then after we do that, you see these paths. These paths effectively kind of communicate what to do next and what is potentially unlocked by us integrating this piece. So if you are have you played a lot of video games like myself, you may have encountered some of these mechanics from games like Assassin's Creed, Dishonored, or anything, and anything else where you have a character and you can make your character stronger over time, and that is a skill tree. So you have your base skills, and over time you have experience, and then your experience unlocks more skills, and so on and so on and so on, and eventually at the end your character is overpowered. So this one kind of borrows that mechanic. So we have the initial utils package. Once that is migrated over, that allows us to create something called create styles. Create styles is part of the style system. Here, it's just a lower level thing from that. And then from that, we have substate, which is the state management system. Then we have styles, and then we have context. And from context, now that we have basically our core systems migrated, we are then able to start constructing the components themselves. And that's what this part is. So what you're seeing, this intertwining of all the things, it's because every single component from this library begins with one component, and that is view. View is the lowest level primitive fundamental component that makes all of this work. View, I'm going to draw it over here. Oops. You can think of view as being sort of like an enhanced kind of div. But view has all of these, not all, but most of these mechanics kind of built into it. It's hooked up to the context system. It definitely comes from the style system. Let's see, and I think that's it for that's it as its foundation. So you can render view as anything using the as prop, which it provides. You can also write your own custom CSS to provide into view using the CSS property. I'm going to make this a little lighter. The CSS prop. So the CSS prop is a mechanic that comes from the style system. And the purpose of this is to allow kind of tweaks to the UI, which almost certainly will happen regardless of how how thorough you are in providing layout components and like providing all the pieces that's needed to kind of construct a UI. Someone somewhere will need to customize something for reasons. So that's what the CSS property is. It allows you to customize the aesthetics of something for reasons. And what's cool about this versus something like if you were to write an inline style is inline styles, they eventually compile down to inline styles, which are kind of difficult to modify after the fact. They are very, very strong. They don't respect things like hover and all that stuff, right? Like once you say inline style color is this, and that's you're basically one step away from using the important bang important. But CSS, it provides you with the flexibility of adding custom inline stuff, but because it comes from the style system, the styles here and the styles here ultimately come together and they are compiled down to the same thing. In other words, you have the features of this, but the style system understands what to do with it so that all the styles play nicely with each other. And this, whoa, I don't know what just happened. So these two things, the as property that lets you render the view as anything, and the CSS property, they are two of the fundamental but super powerful pieces that come from Vue, and Vue is then therefore built on top of all these other systems. Alrighty, so now that we have Vue, we can actually start kind of constructing other things from Vue, and we'll start from the very, very low pieces. And this is, I would describe these sort of as primitives. They're not yet really components that you can see on the screen. So from Vue, the next kind of low-level component we need to create is text. So you may be wondering, why do I need to create a text component? Right? You're like, I can just render some string on the browser or in a span or something and it'll be fine. So where text is very helpful is within the style system. I'm going to tap into the style system now. I'm going to talk about the style system rather. Let's see. What's a good color for the style system? Style. Oh, come on. Style. Yeah, so stylish. So style. Let's see what else. I think mostly just style. Style has a lot of little subsystems kind of built into it. There is theming. There are the different modes like high contrast, colorblind, all that kind of stuff. And there are some other things like a typography system. There is a grid system. There are, what else? I think part of the grid system is a spacing system. There's a z-index system. There's a bunch of all these little subsystems that are part of styles. And typically, if you're working with this from a more traditional kind of CSS architecture kind of perspective, like not doing React, like if you're working at it on this from say like something like a Bootstrap or something similar, they have all of these mechanics built in, although they may call it something else. Like if you take a look at the raw low-level CSS variables for Bootstrap, it's very clear what inherits from what and how things are kind of categorized. Oh yeah, part of this is also a color system. Right. So you have all this stuff that's built into now our style system. And all these concepts aren't new. I didn't make them up. Like I mentioned, the Bootstrap example, like these have existed within the UI/CSS space for a long time. It's just how they are implemented within this components project is slightly unique. Right. So what text is, it taps into the typography system. In typography, as part of this whole thing, it has some kind of base values, right? So there's like some sort of font size, which I believe is 13. On top of that, there is like a mobile font size. There is heading sizes. There's line height. And a bunch of other things. Like it also understands how to do sizing between H1 to H6 for our headers, and also has different other kind of typography sizes. Like it has subheading, it has caption, it has footnotes, it has a couple of other variants as well. So all of that is built in to our very base level text component. And the reason why a text component is useful is because we render text everywhere and we want our text to be consistent. So instead of having to, write custom line height in places, that stuff is already not magically, but it's already built into something like this. And part of this, I'm going to jump back into here. We can see that even before we create text, we have something called Truncate. Truncate is, well, it's a component that truncates stuff. And it's even lower than text. And if you think about it from just like layers, just because it doesn't care about how the text is rendered. Like it doesn't really matter what the line height is or whatever. It cares about like the character count. And truncation is very, very important in UI development and often kind of underestimated or overlooked until the last minute. Like, oh crap, we need to truncate stuff. And truncation happens. There's different ways to truncate things. There is like you have some text here, and then you do the ... You can have multi-line, and before you do a ... you can have some text. You can have ... and some text at the very end, right? This one, by the way, it's impossible to do with CSS. If not impossible, basically near impossible. You need some sort of JavaScript to do some sort of like splitting and counting and doing whatever. And having something like this is, I would say, mandatory if you had files, right? So you had like some sort of a file where it's like abc ... and then you had a ... JPEG, right? That way, if you take a look at macOS's Finder or anything like that, you'll always see some sort of file extension, and that is, again, mandatory if you're working with files. And having something like that built in as part of the text component, where all you need to say is, oh, well, let me render some text and then make sure it truncates in the middle. Done. It makes UI development so much smoother and just easier and just kind of more intuitive. So that being said, view and text, those are the two lowest level components that are at the heart of the component system within this component library project. We have view and we have text. Basically, everything else is built on top of this. Anything text related, like headings and subheadings, they all kind of come from text. Everything else comes from view. And of course, text comes from view as well. So after truncation is done, we're able to build text, and you can see text feeds into some of the other stuff, such as control label, heading, subheading, and so on. So these are kind of our base level primitives that we have. The next layer up is we have lots of layout-based components, and these ones I've noticed they are missing within the WordPress component space, and they're starting to become increasingly more popular with component libraries. And I'm totally not surprised by this, just because of how useful and fundamental they are. For the longest time, people thought of components as being purely things that you can kind of see on screen, like the buttons, the cards, and all that kind of stuff. But there's also a collection of components or things that you need so that you can put your button and your label and all that stuff in the right places. Bootstrap did this using their grid kind of components. That is their container, their row, and their columns. So they mostly had those. And they might have had like pole left and no, they might have floats. It's probably different now, but their main components for layout would be container, row, and columns. But there, as I've experienced this like a couple of years ago, we need more than just that. Just because not everything kind of fits nicely in a 12 by 12 grid kind of setup. So some of the layout components, in addition to these primitives, let's see, I'm just going to write the word layout. We have the very low level flex. Flex is basically a convenient, it's basically CSS Flexbox, but simplified in a way that is designed to accommodate UI design and UI rendering. Because Flex, you can literally do anything. Let me wrap it. Let me write whatever rules to align it to wherever the case may be. But with the Flex component, we have kind of smart defaults kind of built in, so that when you add, say, let's pretend this is our Flex component, and I have one shape that is that size and one shape that is that size. This kind of configuration is probably super common. So you can imagine this is like a title, right? And then this is some sort of like small button. And the fact that they automatically know how to align themselves to the middle, even though the heights are different, and they also know how to push themselves apart like that, right? Which is a very common thing in UI. Like this behavior is built in by default into Flex, so that you don't need to it'll save you writing like 2 or 3 lines of CSS or whatever the case may be. That'll just work. If you do need to change the alignment of like, oh, I want everything to snap to the bottom, I want this guy to snap to the right or the left or whatever the case may be, we have properties for that allow you to make fine-grained adjustments. So that's what Flex is. And then built on top of Flex, we have these two very also fundamental layouts. We have HStack and we have VStack. HStack and VStack, these were things that I kind of relied on for a long time, but I didn't have a name for it. And these names were inspired from SwiftUI. Because for a bit, I started trying to learn SwiftUI, and it blows my mind, by the way, how amazing that language is. But HStack and VStack, they are the two cornerstone fundamental pieces that are part of SwiftUI. And it's very simple. HStack is a thing that allows you to stack UI pieces horizontally. VStack is something that allows you to stack things vertically. That's about it. But these two fundamental things, right? They are all UI. 99% of UI is built on top of these two things. So having those two available for layout kind of construction is super important. That way everything stays kind of consistent. The other thing is like, as you align or stack things next to each other, things need to be spaced apart, right? Like this needs a space, this needs a space, all these ones need spaces. Spacing, item spacing is happens automatically within HStack, within VStack, and also within Flex. It's just part of how they work. And fun fact, remember earlier, let's see if I still have this layer. Yeah, I talked about the style system and there was a spacing system. They actually tap into the spacing system, which is part of the grid system, so that they know how to correctly space things apart in a way that respects the overall kind of UI design language of the library. So spacing isn't like an arbitrary 7 pixels or something like that. It uses a defined set of numbers to spacings apart, which of course you can customize. Like any of this stuff is customizable. You can customize for your needs if you happen to need to space something a little bit extra or a little bit less. Oops. And the last one, the last kind of big, let's see, the last kind of important layout component is grid. And the reason why I kind of didn't group grid with flex is because, well, this one uses CSS grid, first of all, so it's not using that flexbox model. It's using the grid model to align things to the grid, to a grid that you can customize, you can define on the fly to snap things into. So I can snap a UI bit here, I can snap a UI bit there and there and there. And of course, you can customize however many rows or little rows or as many columns or little columns as you want. And you can even adjust them for mobile, tablet, and desktop. A lot of these properties have responsive features built in. And again, this goes back to the grid system. So traditionally, how you would code responsive stuff is you would have to ad hoc add some sort of media query that probably taps into some sort of breakpoint that hopefully your component library or design system provides, so that you won't be writing, say, 640 pixels arbitrarily. And then you would have some style there, and over time, that's how you write responsive styles. Not so much with the G2, or sorry, the next generation component library. Going back to our friendly little CSS property, is a cool thing. So the CSS property, this is part of the style system. So if I did say view CSS is something, right? This property effectively taps into the CSS compiler of this guy. And you can also do that by using a CSS function that the style system provides. And the CSS function, this one's really cool. You can pass it many things. You can pass it a string, you can pass it an object, or you can pass it an array of objects or strings. But if we say passed it an object, this one is special handling. If you needed to say have a, very scribbly right now, a height, right? Let's say on mobile, you needed to have a height of 10, and on desktop, or tablet, you need to have a height of 20, and desktop, you needed to have a height of 30. Traditionally, how you would do it, of course, is you'd have meter queries, you write your breakpoints, and then 10, 20, 30. But here, if you pass it an object with a CSS property, you can actually pass it an array, and you can do 10, 20, 30, and the system understands that that's what you want. When an array is passed into a CSS property in this manner, it understands that this is mobile, this is tablet, and this is desktop. And this thing, which is part of the style system, makes it easier for us to build these UIs in core, but more importantly, makes it easier for folks to make adjustments in their UI for third-party developers. In this particular API, using an array to kind of handle or map to media queries, it's not something I made up. It was something I borrowed from Style System, which uses Styled System, which uses Theme UI, or Theme UI uses Style System. One of those, like both of them they come from the same project, same author. And this was something I kind of adopted from that library because I thought this was such a ingenious kind of way to simplify handling responsive stuff. And once you kind of get it, it maps very, very well, like to the mental model of, oh yeah, mobile, tablet, desktop, done kind of thing. So responsiveness is built into the style system, which is made available through the CSS, either the CSS property or the CSS function, and you can write that for any of these components. Not only that, here's a fun thing. Let's say you or reasons you don't want to use Vue, right? Like right now you're not too ready. You don't want to use Vue. But you do want to try parts of the style system, like the CSS part. What this actually computes to, or like once you execute it, what it actually computes to, what it actually returns, that's the right word, is it returns some sort of hashed CSS class name. That, right? And this hash class name is designed so that there's basically zero conflict when this renders onto the screen, because the likelihood of this class living or existing within your project is very, very slim. Because it gives you basically a string class name, you can literally use it in your existing projects now, or you can use it in a div. So if you did class name equals, then you can plop that guy into here, and you're tapped into the style system without having to use Vue. This adds some flexibility, but you don't get all the benefits of Vue provides. So in addition to tapping into the style system, Vue, it does a lot of it does normalization for you. And it also has things like reduced motion built in. Excuse me, hang on, my nose is itchy. There we go. So what I mean by normalization, man, we'll write this. This is probably the most important thing for CSS. Box sizing border box. Any CSS thing you work with most likely has this as part of some sort of reset. Like either a reset or a normalize or something. This is always there, plus a bunch of other things. So because we want these components in this style system to be able to render in an environment, perfectly working out of the box, the other part of it also is that it cannot affect the current styles of the existing system, which cannot be said about certain kind of UI frameworks or component libraries and so on. For example, if you were just to copy and paste, say, Tailwind or Bootstrap into your existing project, because they rely on some kind of global stuff, it may break your UI. So we can't afford doing that. Therefore, none of these components inject any kind of reset mechanism. Everything they need, from box sizing border box to margin 0 to, those are the main ones. To reduced motion, is built into Vue. That all this stuff, all these normalizations and stuff, is part of the base Vue. They don't leak out. They are just part of the base Vue, and everything. That's why this component is so important. Everything is built from this, because this has all the pieces and all the mechanics it needs to work out of the box without breaking anything in the existing environment. And all of this is built on top of the style system. Cool. So with that, we're able to, say, construct more and more things, right? We have our view. All of our components are happy. It's not breaking anything within the existing environment. We understand we have some primitives. We understand we have some layout components, right? And once all that is done, we can finally render some bit of UI, something that you can see on the screen. And I've chosen button as a candidate just because of how often a button renders within UI. It's very, very common. This is probably, buttons and inputs are probably the two most common things that you would find within UI. And button, you can see there are several pieces feeding into button, which means that in order for us to even render a button, we need to create all these things, which is good. We're creating our foundation. And then once we have our button component, the next step is to render it within Gutenberg without breaking everything. And that's where the context system comes into play. And that's what this little adapt thing is. So here's the strategy. Here's what I'm thinking for how this stuff is going to work. We have, let's just say, I need some colors. Let's say this is the current, the current WordPress component button, right? Oops. Everything is using button, like button is used in all over the place to do things. Great, cool. But now we want to introduce a new button over here. So we can't just straight up replace this, right? Because if we did, things like it may just literally break everything here. Just because CSS reasons or these particular parts weren't expecting certain things to happen. So we need to be able to do it in a very controlled way. So what needs to happen with this adapt thing is that it allows for both buttons to live together at the same time. But by default, this new button is sort of dormant. It's there, but it's not activated. So let's say in this particular region, oh, cool, we are ready to use a new button, right? So we are able to, using the context system, and I wrote about this in various blog posts and stuff, we're able to effectively activate the new button here by basically passing sort of like a feature flag. Cool, so now the new button renders here. And we just repeat this throughout all the various sections until we have the new button rendering in a bunch of different places. And eventually, over time, in addition to buttons and text, like all the various components, right? Buttons, text inputs, and so on, they will slowly propagate themselves throughout the UI, but it's throughout the application. But it's done so in this very intentional, controlled, non-disruptive strategy. And all the APIs for button here, we have to guarantee that it is backwards compatible here. The reason for that is we cannot expect, like once we integrate the new button here, right? Maybe there are third-party developers that rely on the button to render in this area. We cannot expect and we cannot force them to, we have a new button, you got to update all your code. We can't do that. That's irresponsible, and this just won't work. Therefore, excuse me, all the old component APIs need to work here, but some component APIs are different between the old and the new, just because we want to be able to improve the APIs over time. So, for example, inside of the old button, in order to make it small, you would pass in an is small prop. But with the new component API, it's size. So size equals small. Right? And you can also pass in different sizes. Size large, size extra small, and so on. So some of the APIs have been consolidated or modified slightly. But in order to make things backwards compatible, we need some sort of layer, right? To be able to translate this to this so that button, the new button, knows how to understand it. And that's what this adapt thing is. This adapter is the thing that allows us to add our button into the system, but make it dormant so that it's not used in places until we're ready. But also, it provides this translation layer so that when the switch is flipped, it understands how to use older component APIs as well as supporting new ones. And with this in play, the system in theory should not be disrupted, right? Component API still works. We're enabling things, feature flagging, enabling things in a kind of controlled manner. so that we can ensure that, once we activate this button, the whole thing doesn't explode, which it won't, but just being exaggerating a little bit here. So that's what this adapt thing is. And this adapting strategy can only work because in the very beginning, I had mentioned the 6 or 7 systems because a context system exists. Because the component here is aware of the system, it's aware of where it is, and the system can tell it to render a certain way. The system or the section or the chunk or whatever piece of you, like a sidebar or something, it can instruct any button rendering inside to be like, oh, render the new button now, and the switch can be flipped. And with all that said, right, the main 6 or 7 systems we have initially integrated here, the primary view component that literally composes and builds everything, the primitives, the layout components, the first component that you can see on screen, that being the button, the adapter strategy, where we're able to introduce a new UI in a non-disruptive way. With all that kind of being done, we can then move forward with the other pieces. So cool. We can now build a text input, and now we can build a unit input. We can now build a select control, and so on. And the pieces that you're seeing up here, right, these kind of things in blue, the reason why I kind of split them between blue and yellow is that the yellow, these are like the primary kind of objectives that we want to accomplish. These things in blue, they're kind of like the setup pieces that's required to allow for this to happen. And besides the stuff kind of from the very beginning, they're kind of staggered in a way where, okay, once we're kind of here, where we're able to work on some blue things so that, select control has all the pieces that it needs to kind of move forward. And that's kind of how I'm envisioning this rolling out. And we can kind of see that in this kind of a spreadsheet view that I've created so far to kind of coordinate all the different phases that we have for this integration idea. So for the first part, the kind of end of November, Sarah and myself, we've been working on preparing the code so that we can then copy and paste it within Gutenberg so that like all the loose ends have been tied. The style system makes sense. Everything, works together nicely. Dependencies are kind of taken care of. Unused code is removed. Things are consolidated. Types are written, and so on. All this prep stuff so that the code is as good as it can be so that we can move it into the project. So now we're at the phase where we're starting to move the initial packages. Utils, the very base level one to start. And then after that, we'll have the state management system, we have the style system, we have the context system, and then once that is done, we can then move on to the individual components themselves, starting with the button. And you can kind of see the timeline of this within December. Once these bits are done, it's kind of highlighted in light gray here. I don't know if you can see. Maybe I should change that to a different color. I can do it after. But yeah, these light gray pieces, these are kind of roughly timeline of when I expect we should be able to do these things, but they're staggered in a way that kind of communicate this thing needs to be done first before we do this thing. This thing needs to be done first before we can do this thing. And here you can see that we have two chunks kind of in parallel, meaning that we can actually start these pieces before these pieces are done. And this is kind of how I'm envisioning the order of operations for how everything kind of flows out. Now, that being said, December and, it's kind of holiday season, right? People are taking time off, myself included. These are just rough estimates because I personally have yet to plan my days off, so I don't know what days I'm taking off. So these may not be 100% accurate. Just saying. So for example, Sarah at the moment, she's taking some well-deserved time off and she'll be back within less than 2 weeks. So we'll see how this goes, but this is essentially the order of operations as I see it playing out. And you can see kind of what needs to go feed into what from this sort of flow map view here. And lastly, we have the third phase, and the third phase is build. So up until now, all we've been doing is we've been adding the fundamental systems and the initial chunk of UI from the component library into into Gutenberg. We've adapted them to make sure that the current system does not break. We've gotten everything ready for this moment. And this moment is we're going to build some stuff. And the thing that we're going to build is we're going to build, excuse me, we are going to build new typography tools to support the global styles effort. And that is touched upon here. So right now, it's all this stuff. It's very visually, it's quite messy, but that aside, from a code perspective, it's very difficult to construct and rig these things up. That's because from a systematic level, the components to do this, they weren't there, really. A lot of this stuff was written kind of ad hoc. And then when you want to build on top of that, or even just say reuse parts of this in another area, it's very, very difficult. So that's one of the main drivers behind this kind of component project, and the reason why it's architected the way that it is. So we have the new kind of oh geez, this is super zoomed in. I apologize. How do I zoom out of this? Command minus. Okay. So we have new typography tools. The actual UI here may be different, like instead of the box being, say, 40 pixels tall, maybe 36. Those are minor details, not super important. The main thing is we have some new mechanics built into this, and that we can add, you can see that little controls can be added or removed from the UI manually through this kind of new drop-down thing, or defined in the theme.json. So these little UI bits need to be able to be responsive in terms of how they render. If line height is removed, if size is removed, line height needs to know how to snap into place. Or if something like this one, right, we have a chunk of 4, a cluster of 4. If appearance is removed, line height needs to snap to the right, to the left, and so on. And that is possible because we have layout components like grid. So this is effectively what we're building, and everything I've talked about beforehand was so that we can do this as the initial project, because eventually, hopefully, these components, these systems, these strategies will be rolled out throughout the entirety of the Gutenberg UI. Hopefully. But typography tools, this is our kind of starting place. And that's what this part is. The first little chunk is just to do kind of some stuff to prepare for that new show hide mechanic of the dropdown, and also some refactors so that when we start building the actual kind of controls, that being line height or font size or font family and so on, we have the kind of best practices and the architecture in place so that we're not hack coding all this stuff. The components are good, fine. They're high performant. They know how to style themselves, all that stuff. But data needs to flow into them somehow, and data needs to flow out of them somehow. And that data flow relationship right now is a little verbose and a little messy from the style hook kind of perspective as it relates to design tools. Hopefully, it's not a must, but that's something that I'm hoping that we can refine during this kind of process, during the construction of this UI. Because once we can nail that, the next kind of design tool that we can approach, perhaps color, it'll be a little bit easier, and it'll get easier over time because we put in the effort and the thought to architect this in a way where we're not shooting ourselves in the foot every time. So yeah, this was a lot. I understand. But these are the high level plans effectively of this new kind of components project for Gutenberg and for WordPress. What you're seeing here is a flow map in terms of in terms of the order of what needs to be built, how they relate to each other. This is sort of like a more traditional calendar layout, I suppose, for tasks that are being done and what order they're being done. But most importantly, I wanted to create this stream and ultimately this video, because it'll be saved, to communicate what the various systems are and why they are so fundamentally important to making this whole thing work, right? This view component is not just a div. It is everything here. It just happens to render as a div. And this enhanced div also happens to literally power everything here and everything beyond, right? This is just the initial component set. We're going to be building new components from this. And for you third-party developers, you're going to be, once this is available, you'll probably build components from this as well. So with that in mind, we have to make sure the design decisions, mostly from an architecture and systems level, is as correct as it can be. so that we can set up this UI design and development kind of experience to be the best that it can be. Both for the end users that get to enjoy using Gutenberg and WordPress, but then also for the contributors and developers that are using this code and building the cool things that you folks build every day. So yeah, that is my little stream for today. It's been a little bit over an hour. I do apologize for the length, but there was quite a bit to go over. Hopefully this was helpful. I am available to answer any questions. You can ping me on the WordPress Slack. You can hit me up on Twitter. Thank you so much for your time today. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. You've been wonderful. I've been Q. Take care. Bye.